Do you remember Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth, and the five Bennet sisters in Pride and Prejudice? Look at them today. You may barely recognize some of them. Some became Hollywood icons, others are no longer with us, and two familiar faces were actually mother and daughter in real life. This is how the Pride and Prejudice casts in 2026. Colin Firth. Colin Firth nearly let Fitzwilliam Darcy slip through his fingers when he was 34 years old. He initially turned down the role of Elizabeth Bennet's proud and famously reserved romantic interest in Pride and Prejudice, convinced he was not elegant or commanding enough to play him. But after being persuaded to reconsider, Firth stepped into the role. And one scene changed everything. The sight of Darcy emerging from a lake in a soaking wet white shirt turned Firth into an unexpected sex symbol almost overnight. Darcy's shadow, however, proved difficult to escape. For years, Firth worked to show audiences that he was capable of far more than playing the handsome, restrained English gentleman. He eventually succeeded with more demanding performances, including A Single Man, before reaching a career high with The King's Speech. His portrayal of King George VI earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor in 2011. But away from the screen, Firth's own love story was far less romantic. He married Italian producer Livia Giugioli in 1997, and the couple had two sons together. After more than 2 decades of marriage, their private troubles suddenly became public in 2018. Giugioli acknowledged having had a relationship with an Italian journalist while she and Firth were temporarily separated. The situation became even more complicated when she accused the former lover of stalking and harassing her, bringing intense media attention to the family. Firth and Giugioli attempted to rebuild their marriage, but in 2019 they announced their separation after 22 years together. In 2026, Colin Firth turns 66 and continues to work steadily as an actor. More than 3 decades after Mr. Darcy made him an international heartthrob, he has long since proved that his career was built on far more than one wet shirt. Today, he remains one of the most respected and recognizable figures in British cinema. Benjamin Whitrow. At 57, Benjamin Whitrow stepped into the role of Mr. Bennet, the weary father of 5 daughters whose detached manner and dry sarcasm concealed a particularly deep affection for Elizabeth. Whitrow brought such effortless wit, calmness, and understated humor to the character that his performance earned him a BAFTA nomination. Whitrow's private life, however, was more complicated than the respectable family man he portrayed on screen. He married Catherine Cook in 1972, and they had 2 children together. But he also had a relationship with actress Celia Imrie, with whom he had a son, Angus Imrie, who would later follow his parents into acting. Despite this complicated family life, Whitrow remained remarkably private. He rarely allowed his personal affairs to overshadow his work, and his career continued without the kind of public scandal that followed many of his contemporaries. Then, in September 2017, his life came to an unexpectedly sudden end. Benjamin Whitrow died in Wimbledon, London, on September 28th, after suffering a brain hemorrhage. He was 80 years old. His death closed the chapter on a career that had lasted for more than half a century. Beyond Pride and Prejudice, audiences may also remember him from Quadrophenia and Poirot, while a younger generation heard his unmistakable voice as Fowler, the stern old rooster in Chicken Run in 2000. Jennifer Ailey, chosen from hundreds of hopefuls, Jennifer Ailey was only 25 when she became Elizabeth Bennet, the intelligent, sharp-witted, and fiercely independent young woman who ultimately wins the heart of Mr. Darcy. With her radiant smile and wonderfully expressive eyes, Ailey seemed almost perfectly suited to Jane Austen's beloved heroine. The role became her breakthrough and earned her the BAFTA Award for Best Actress, turning a relatively unknown actress into one of British television's brightest new faces. But behind the cameras, another story was quietly unfolding. During the production, Ailey and her co-star Colin Firth began a real-life relationship, giving audiences a romance that extended beyond Elizabeth and Darcy. Their relationship attracted considerable attention from the British press, but it did not last. By the time Pride and Prejudice had turned them into household names, their romance was already coming to an end. Ailey would later choose a noticeably quieter path, keeping much of her personal life away from the intense glare that followed her early success. Rather than chasing conventional Hollywood stardom, Ale built an impressive career on her own terms. She returned repeatedly to the stage and won 2 Tony Awards while carefully choosing screen roles in acclaimed productions such as Contagion, The King's Speech, Zero Dark 30, and A Quiet Place. It was a career defined less by celebrity than by consistently respected performances. As of 2026, Jennifer Ale is 56 years old. She has been married to writer Michael Ryan since 2001, and they have 2 children. More than 30 years after Elizabeth Bennet made her famous, Ale has built a life remarkably different from the whirlwind of attention that surrounded her in the 1990s, continuing to act while largely keeping herself and her family away from the machinery of celebrity. Barbara Leigh Hunt. Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the wealthy, domineering, and wonderfully arrogant aunt who tries to control Elizabeth Bennet's future, was brought memorably to life by Barbara Leigh Hunt. At 59, she gave the character exactly the commanding presence the role demanded, making every cold stare and cutting remark feel completely natural. Away from the screen, however, Leigh Hunt's life was far warmer. She married fellow actor Richard Pascoe in 1967, beginning a marriage that lasted nearly half a century until his death in 2014. By then, Leigh Hunt had already quietly stepped away from acting, with her final screen work coming in the mid-2000s. There was no dramatic farewell or retirement announcement. She simply disappeared from the spotlight after decades devoted largely to British stage and screen. Her career had stretched far beyond Pride and Prejudice. Film audiences remembered her particularly for Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy and, decades later, Billy Elliot, while her distinguished theater career brought her an Olivier Award in 1993. Even after she stopped performing, those roles ensured that her name remained familiar to generations of British audiences. On September 16, 2024, she died peacefully at her home in Warwickshire at the age of 88. Her passing brought to a close a remarkably quiet but distinguished life, one shaped not by celebrity or scandal, but by decades of respected work on the British stage and screen. Alison Steadman. The nervous laughter, endless chatter, and desperate determination to marry off 5 daughters. That was the unforgettable Mrs. Bennet Alison Steadman brought to life at 48. Her wonderfully exaggerated performance turned a character who could easily have become irritating into one of the great comic pleasures of Pride and Prejudice. Even decades later, Steadman's Mrs. Bennet remains one of the performances against which later adaptations are inevitably compared. Away from the Bennet household, Steadman's own family life took a more difficult turn. She married director Mike Leigh in 1973, and they had 2 sons together. Their personal and professional lives had been closely connected for years, with Leigh directing her in some of the work that established her reputation as one of Britain's finest actresses. But the marriage eventually broke down, and they divorced in 2001 after nearly 3 decades together. Steadman later found lasting companionship with actor Michael Elwyn, beginning a much more settled chapter of her life. Her career, meanwhile, never lost its momentum. Her collaborations with Mike Leigh produced some of her most acclaimed work, including Life is Sweet and High Hopes, while The Rise and Fall of Little Voice brought her an Olivier Award. Years later, she found an entirely new generation of fans as the wonderfully eccentric Pam Shipman in Gavin and Stacey, proving that Mrs. Bennet had been only one chapter in a remarkably long career. Today, Alison Steadman is 80 years old. Far from disappearing completely from public life, she has continued working selectively, including television and nature-related projects. More than 30 years after Pride and Prejudice, the frantic Mrs. Bennet remains unforgettable, but Steadman herself has built a career far richer and longer than any single role. Tim Wilton. In Pride and Prejudice, Tim Wilton brought a rare sense of calm to Elizabeth Bennet's chaotic family world as her uncle, Mr. Gardiner. At 54, Wilton made him warm, sensible, and quietly dependable, the complete opposite of the noise and nervous energy surrounding the Bennet household. By then, he was already a familiar face on British television, with appearances in popular series including The Sweeney, Poirot, and Rumpole of the Bailey. After Pride and Prejudice, Wilton became even more familiar to television audiences through two long-running roles. He played Lowell Ferris in As Time Goes By from 1996 to 2002, and later Stanley Dawkins in My Hero from 2000 to 2006. Acting also continued into the next generation of his family through his son, Hugh Higginson, who built a successful television career of his own. A painful turning point came in 2013 when Wilton's wife, actress Pat Keane, died after more than half a century of marriage. Around this later period of his life, Wilton gradually disappeared from the screen himself. Rather than announcing a dramatic retirement, he simply stepped away from the profession that had occupied much of his adult life. By 2026, Tim Wilton is 86 and has remained out of the public spotlight for more than a decade. After a career stretching across theater, film, and some of Britain's best-loved television series, the actor who once gave Elizabeth Bennet such a reassuring uncle has chosen a similarly quiet final chapter for himself. Julia Sawalha. On screen, Lydia Bennet was the spark that nearly set the entire family on fire. The reckless 15-year-old youngest sister who became infatuated with Wickham and ran away with him without considering what it could do to her family's reputation. Julia Sawalha, however, was already 26 when she played her. The age difference was surprisingly easy to forget, as Sawalha captured Lydia's giggling excitement, impulsiveness, and teenage foolishness so convincingly that she seemed years younger on screen. Years later, however, the youthful voice that had served her so well became part of one of the most painful episodes of her career. Sawalha had famously voiced Ginger in the original Chicken Run, but in 2020 she revealed that she would not be returning for the sequel. According to Sawalha, she was told that her voice now sounded too old. She publicly challenged the decision and even recorded a new voice test to demonstrate that she could still play Ginger. The controversy quickly became part of a wider discussion about ageism and the different standards faced by women in the entertainment industry. Her personal life also followed a very different path from the marriage-obsessed world of the Bennet sisters. Sawalha had several public relationships over the years, but never married or had children, eventually embracing a quieter and more independent life away from the constant attention that surrounded her earlier career. Now, Julia Sawalha turns 58 and remains a familiar face to generations who grew up with Pride and Prejudice, Absolutely Fabulous, and Chicken Run. She has lived largely outside the Hollywood spotlight in recent years, but her willingness to speak publicly about losing Ginger gave her career an unexpected new chapter. This time not as a reckless teenager, but as an actress refusing to stay silent about how women are treated as they grow older. Susanna Harker. It was not simply her beauty, but also her background in a family with generations of ties to the performing arts that helped prepare Susanna Harker for the role of Jane Bennet, the gentle, kind-hearted eldest Bennet sister whose trusting nature sometimes leaves her vulnerable to heartbreak. Harker was 30 when she took on the role, bringing with her the classical features that seemed almost to have stepped straight from the pages of Jane Austen. By then, she had already made a name for herself through A Dry White Season and the original British House of Cards, with Ultraviolet coming later in her career. But Harker's real-life love story did not have the same happy ending as Jane Bennet's. She married actor Ian Glenn, who would later become internationally famous as Jorah Mormont in Game of Thrones, and the couple had a son together. Their marriage ended in divorce in 2004. Her later relationship with actor Paul McGann also ended without marriage, adding another painful chapter to a personal life marked by romantic disappointments. From the 2000s and 10s onward, Harker's acting career gradually became less prominent as she dealt with depression and health problems. Rather than remaining constantly in front of the cameras, she increasingly turned her attention toward teaching drama, using decades of experience to help guide younger performers. In 2026, at 61, Susanna Harker lives a much quieter life than she did during the height of Pride and Prejudice. With her screen appearances now far less frequent, much of her attention has shifted toward passing on what she learned during a lifetime in the theater and acting world to a younger generation. Crispin Bonham Carter. Few viewers watching the cheerful and wealthy Mr. Bingley in Pride and Prejudice could have imagined that the actor playing him would eventually exchange the television set for the classroom. Crispin Bonham Carter, a distant cousin of Helena Bonham Carter, was 26 when he played Bingley. His open smile and natural warmth made him an ideal match for the good-hearted gentleman who falls almost immediately for Jane Bennet. Bonham Carter continued acting after the series, appearing in productions including Bridget Jones's Diary and the 2006 Casino Royale. But unlike Colin Firth, Pride and Prejudice did not lead him toward international stardom. After years of working across film, television, and theater, he gradually began moving toward a very different profession. That new chapter was education. Bonham Carter trained as a teacher and eventually left professional acting behind, teaching English and drama before moving into school leadership. Away from his career, he built an equally settled family life after marrying Catherine Julian Dawnay in 1996. The couple have 4 sons. Today, Crispin Bonham Carter is 56, and his life looks remarkably different from the acting world that first made him familiar to millions. He has gone from playing one of Jane Austen's most eligible gentlemen to building a second career in education, proof that sometimes walking away from the spotlight can open the door to an entirely new life. David Bamber. Bowing. A little too deeply, speaking in endless circles, and constantly trying to please others with an almost embarrassing level of obedience. That was the formula that made Mr. Collins one of the most ridiculous figures in the Bennet family's world. David Bamber was 40 when he took on the role, and rather than exaggerating the character, he played him with remarkable restraint. The result made Mr. Collins both irritating and strangely pitiful at the same time. From there, Bamber went on to appear in major British and international productions, including Valkyrie, The King's Speech, HBO's Rome, and Foyle's War. What many viewers may not realize is that behind an actor so often associated with awkward and eccentric characters lies an unusually stable personal life. Bamber married actress Julia Swift in 1982, and they have 2 children together. Their marriage has lasted for more than 4 decades, a remarkable degree of stability in a profession where relationships are often tested by long separations and unpredictable careers. In 2026, at 72, David Bamber has still not completely left the stage behind. After decades across television, film, and theater, he remains a respected figure in British acting, continuing to favor the craft of live performance rather than chasing the glamour of commercial stardom. Anna Chancellor. There were no screaming fits and no openly cruel attacks. Caroline Bingley could make herself unpleasant with little more than a contemptuous glance and a softly delivered remark sharp enough to cut. It was the kind of character that demanded subtlety, and Anna Chancellor, at 29, mastered that art beautifully. The role became part of a career filled with strong, sharp-witted women, with Chancellor later appearing in productions including 4 Weddings and a Funeral, The Hour, and Pennyworth, while also earning a BAFTA nomination. Real life, however, brought her a tragedy no acting role could ever have prepared her for. Chancellor had a daughter, Poppy, from her earlier relationship with poet Jock Scott. In September 2023, Poppy died from leukemia at just 36 years old. It was a devastating loss for Chancellor, turning what had once been a private mother-daughter relationship into the most painful chapter of her life. By 2026, Anna Chancellor is 61. After marrying Reda Deba in 2010, she has continued moving forward with her life and career while also supporting charitable causes. More than 3 decades after audiences loved to dislike her as Caroline Bingley, Chancellor continues to act, but now carries with her a personal loss far greater than anything she was ever asked to portray on screen. Adrian Lucas. In 2021, audiences were given the unusual chance to hear Wickham tell his own story, not in Pride and Prejudice, but in Being Mr. Wickham, a one-man play co-written and performed by Adrian Lucas himself. It came nearly 3 decades after Lucas first played the charming but calculating officer at 38. Few actors have chosen to return so deliberately to the character that helped define their career, and it showed just how strongly Wickham had remained with Lucas through the years. Between playing charming rogues and more complicated characters, Lucas built a steady career with appearances in Garrow's Law, Holby City, and Toast of London, alongside many years of stage work. Yet the man behind Wickham could hardly be more different from the character audiences remember. Lucas married actress Michelle El Costa in 1985, and they have 2 children. Away from the screen, he has largely kept his family life private and far removed from the romantic scandals associated with his most famous character. Now, Adrian Lucas is 69 and remains active in both television and theater. His career has rarely depended on celebrity or headlines, but it has remained remarkably steady, and decades later, George Wickham is still a character he has never entirely left behind. Lucy Scott. Charlotte Lucas does not marry for love, nor does she wait for a Mr. Darcy of her own. She chooses Mr. Collins because, for a woman with limited choices in Jane Austen's world, he offers something far more practical: security. Lucy Scott was 29 when she played Charlotte, capturing the character's clear-eyed acceptance of reality without turning her into someone cold or heartless. It was one of the less glamorous roles in Pride and Prejudice, but also one of its most quietly realistic. Scott's own career eventually took a similarly practical direction. Rather than pursuing screen stardom at any cost, she maintained strong connections with the theater and gradually moved toward work away from the camera. Her career became increasingly associated with stage work and teaching, allowing her experience as a performer to find a new purpose beyond television. In 2026, Lucy Scott is 60. She has remained largely outside the public spotlight that followed some of her Pride and Prejudice co-stars, with much of her later professional life centered on theater and education. In an unexpected way, her path reflects something of Charlotte Lucas herself, a life shaped not by glamour, but by practical choices and a quiet determination to build something lasting. Joanna David. There is one detail that many viewers of the 1995 Pride and Prejudice may never have noticed. The actress who played the warm and sensible Mrs. Gardiner was, in real life, the mother of the young woman playing Georgiana Darcy in the very same production. Joanna David was 48 when she took on the role, bringing a natural warmth and quiet wisdom to one of the few adults Elizabeth Bennet could truly rely upon. Her long relationship with celebrated actor Edward Fox produced 2 children, including Amelia Fox, who would later become one of the most recognizable faces on British television. Having mother and daughter appear in the same Pride and Prejudice adaptation made the production more than simply another acting job. It became a particularly unusual family memory. David herself had already built a distinguished career, stretching from the acclaimed 1979 adaptation of Rebecca to later appearances in productions such as War and Peace, Downton Abbey, and Midsummer Murders. Today, Joanna David is 79 and lives a much quieter life than during the busiest years of her career. Surrounded by one of Britain's best-known acting families, she has also had the pleasure of watching Amelia carry the family tradition into another generation, more than 3 decades after mother and daughter unexpectedly shared the same Jane Austen world. Amelia Fox. At 21, when many young actors were still waiting for their first real opportunity, Amelia Fox stepped directly into one of Britain's most celebrated literary adaptations as Georgiana Darcy, Mr. Darcy's shy and innocent younger sister. It was Fox's television debut, and there was an extraordinary family connection behind it. The actress playing Mrs. Gardiner in the same production was her real-life mother, Joanna David. From that unusual beginning, Fox went on to become a major name in British television, most famously as forensic pathologist Dr. Nikki Alexander in Silent Witness, a role she has played since 2004. Her romantic life, however, proved considerably less straightforward than her career. After an earlier engagement to comedian Vic Reeves, Fox married actor Jared Harris in 2005. Their marriage ended in divorce in 2010, following a difficult period that included the painful experience of a miscarriage. Her later relationship with peace activist Jeremy Gilley brought another important chapter into her life: their daughter, Rose. The relationship eventually ended, leaving Fox to balance motherhood with an increasingly demanding television career. In 2026, Emilia Fox turns 52 and remains one of the most familiar faces on British television. More than 30 years after appearing alongside her own mother in Pride and Prejudice, she has built a remarkable career of her own, one that ultimately grew far beyond the small, shy role of Georgiana Darcy that started it all. Lucy Briers. Mary Bennet was the third Bennet daughter, the sister considered less attractive than Jane and Elizabeth, but forever trying to appear serious, philosophical, and artistically accomplished. She buried herself in moral books, offered solemn observations whenever possible, and possessed a singing voice that was memorable for all the wrong reasons. Lucy Briers was 28 when she played Mary, willingly making herself look deliberately plain with thick glasses, flat hair, and pale makeup to capture the awkwardness and loneliness of a young woman constantly overshadowed by her more colorful sisters. As the daughter of beloved television actor Richard Briers, Lucy could easily have been seen as someone benefiting from a famous family name. Instead, she pursued formal training of her own, studying at Lancaster University before attending the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. Yet the role that first brought her widespread recognition also became difficult to escape. After Pride and Prejudice, Briers often found herself cast as stern, eccentric, awkward, or deliberately unglamorous women. Rather than allowing that typecasting to define her career, she turned increasingly toward the stage. Years of theater work allowed Briers to demonstrate a much wider range than Mary Bennet had suggested, while television gradually offered her more varied opportunities. She went on to appear in respected productions including Doctor Who, Endeavour, Victoria, The Crown, and Red Rose. Away from acting, Briers has remained exceptionally private, keeping her personal and romantic life almost entirely outside the public eye. As of 2026, Lucy Briers is 59 and continues to work across British theatre and television. Over the decades, she has increasingly taken on formidable, eccentric, and sometimes darker characters, a long way from the painfully awkward young woman sitting at the piano in Longbourn. Mary Bennet may have introduced her to millions, but Briers spent the years that followed proving there was far more to her than thick glasses and one famously dreadful song. So that's the Pride and Prejudice cast, then and now in 2026. More than 30 years later, time has transformed those familiar faces in ways few fans could have imagined. Which actor's transformation surprised you the most, and who will always be your favorite? Share your memories in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more Then and Now stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.